In December 2019, the Labour Party lost a general election by a particularly heavy margin. They've spent the time since then asking the question, why? Why did they lose, and why did they lose so heavily? I think the Labour Party's really boxed itself into a corner. And I don't think that it recognises the corner that it's boxed itself into. I think it believes that it's on the right track. It just needs to explain itself more, or do things a little bit better, or do the same things better. It boxed itself into a corner through the act of championing mass immigration. When Tony Blair got into power in 1997, immigration was roughly at 50,000 a year net, and it grew to about 200,000 net. What it did when it began that process, and of course that's accelerated under the Conservative Party, but what it did was to import an outgroup which it then became closely associated with. If you look at someone like Jess Phillips, she constantly talks about immigrants. Why does she do that? Well, her seat is in Birmingham. Now, if you look at the demographics of Birmingham, she is now heavily dependent on the Muslim vote. And that's the problem. That's the corner that Labour has boxed itself into. It is now heavily dependent on the Muslim vote. It has to represent that community. So it's trying to represent their interests. And what are their interests? Well, primarily, more immigration. These people have no link to the country. It's not their country. They still refer to themselves as Pakistanis. So the continuation of mass immigration is really important to them. Now, why did historically the working class vote Labour? Why did they vote Labour? Well, they voted Labour because they believed that the Labour Party represented their interests. When you import 200,000 to 300,000 people a year into the country, you're no longer representing the group, you're representing the outgroup. Because the outgroup, their interests are in direct conflict to the group. British people will look at immigrants from Somalia, from India, from Pakistan, from wherever, and they will recognise that those people are competition. They're competition for jobs, they're competition for social housing, for access to schools, to hospitals. Those people are in competition to them. That group, that outgroup, is in conflict, in competition with their group. So that's the mistake that the Labour Party has made. That's the corner that it's boxed itself into. It now represents the interests of the outgroup that are in direct conflict with the group. That's the reason the working class stopped voting Labour. I mean, sure, there are people in the working class that will continue to vote Labour out of tribal loyalty without realising that Labour does not owe them loyalty. It does not feel loyalty to them. Now, in the medium term, I can't see where Labour can go from here. If they want to get power in the medium term, they have to represent the interests of essentially the white working class. But they can't do that. They can't make that kind of a radical leap. They just can't do it. What has happened is that the working class now look at the Conservative Party, as imperfect as it is for the working class, but they vote Conservative because they believe that the Conservative Party best represents their interests. What are their interests? Decent paid jobs and access to social housing. The only way out that I can see for the Labour Party right now is to look to the long term. They must abandon the medium term. They must accept that they are going to be in opposition for the next 10, 20 or 30 years and wait until immigrant numbers are such that they can get back in power again. Because we know that 75% of immigrants vote Labour. That's a pretty black-pilled realisation to come to. And that's not good for democracy. The Conservative Party need a good challenger, but what we're going to see develop, I think, is an England dominated by the Conservatives, a Scotland dominated by the SNP, Wales falling somewhere in between. There has to be a challenger to the Conservative Party, and I can only see that coming from a nationalist party that is socially conservative, and that nationalist, socially conservative party does not exist at this moment in time. But the future for the Labour Party is bleak. I don't think they have it in them to be radical enough to become a nationalist party. It just won't happen. So that's why the Labour Party lost the working class support. It lost working class support because it stopped representing their interests.